We're going to discuss period 5, which is the Civil War, Reconstruction, and Manifest Destiny. So it starts in 1844 with the election of James K. Polk, who runs on a campaign against Henry Clay of Manifest Destiny and wins. So what that symbolizes the increased demand for manifest destiny within this time period. Manifest destiny being the belief in American expansion, its destiny too. It's our God-given right to manifest more destiny, right? And so they dream of America that goes from sea to shining sea, that conquering Canada, as well as Mexico and all of North America. So they tried to conquer Canada in the War of 1812 and failed, but they still think that they can do it. And Polk is the president that gets the most territory out of any president ever. And so he gets Texas immediately as soon as he enters office in 1845. And he also gets the Mexican Cession after the Mexican War, which ends in 1848, and that leads, and then he also gets Oregon in the 1850s. 54-40. I think it was 54-40 or fight, right? And he didn't get 54-40, but he did get like 49, so pretty good. He did what he said. He said something and did it. Unlike most politicians who say something just to get a rouse out of people, get votes, and then don't do anything during their term of office, but then still somehow get reelected. But he actually did exactly what he said he was going to try and do, which was manifest more destiny, of course. And so he expanded America greatly. And so his Mexican Cession after the Mexican-American War led to an issue whether they should be slave states or whether they should be free states. And so this is the beginning of the Free Soil movement, which basically states that slavery should stay where it is and should not expand. Abraham Lincoln was a free soiler, not an abolitionist. He did not believe in the complete removal of slavery until he had to do it to get to stop Europe from entering the Civil War with his Emancipation Proclamation to turn the tide of the war, as well as his Gettysburg Address. So we have this idea of manifest destiny, God-given right for America to expand from sea to shining sea. And so the Mexican Cession is taken care of with, so the Wilmot Proviso never passes, basically trying to say that slavery should not go into the Mexican Cession territories. So what happens is that Henry Clay proposes a compromise. Again, he's the great compromiser. And so his compromise is the Compromise of 1850, which leads to the Civil War, more so than anything before. So it creates this harsher fugitive slave law. It admits California as a free state. It pays the Texan debt. And it says that there should be popular sovereignty in the Mexican Cession. They can be either free or slave, whatever they want, right? So this is a problem. California is now a free state, and now we have one more free state than we do slave states. But then we also have this fugitive slave law that is good for the South, because now it says that every single person in the North must bring any escaped slaves down to the South. And so this is a problem with the North. They don't like this at all. They don't like advocating for slavery at all, especially abolitionists. This really upsets abolitionists. And so this is further exemplified with Uncle Tom's Cabin in 1852, because now the Northerners realize that they're participating in this terrible system of slavery, and it's just absolutely horrid. And so they pass these laws that tried to basically nullified the fugitive slave law, and so they just keep the slaves in there, and a lot of people become abolitionists after they realize this. And so the abolition movement grows, and we also have the Underground Railroad in this time period, and we also have the Dred Scott case in 1857, which really hits hard on the abolitionists, because it basically says that black people aren't citizens and they do not have the right to sue in court, whatsoever. And so this really upsets abolitionists because now they have to realize that black citizens are not a thing. All freedmen aren't free; they are slaves, and they are property under the protection of property by the federal government, and so they have to return their property and abide by the fugitive slave law, and can no longer say that these freedmen are citizens. Of course, no one listens to this, really, because of the Civil War that happened 3 years later, but this really, really grinds on the abolitionist movement, and it gets them really, really upset. And so you have the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854, which leads to the Bleeding Kansas, and that's because it sets up popular sovereignty in the Kansas-Nebraska Act. With Kansas and Nebraska, Nebraska becomes a free state, and Kansas has to decide whether it wants to be a free or a slave state. And of course, this leads to corruption, boycotting, and eventually it becomes a slave state with the Lecompton Constitution, and then it becomes a free state later on. And it's very strange, and that's because of all these people who ran in from Missouri into Kansas and then voted in these elections, and so it was like this really corrupt election. And then the Free Soilers, they boycotted the election instead of actually voting, and then this led to them actually losing the election, and creating the Lecompton Constitution, which said that it was a slave state. And this Kansas-Nebraska Act actually overturned the Missouri Compromise, which really, really sucked for Free Soilers, who were very upset about this. And it basically forced them to accept slavery, and it shoved it down their throat, which we saw on which you will probably see in a document on a DBQ or in a stimulus-based question on the multiple choice. And so now we get into the election of 1860, which is the final breaking point for the Civil War, because with Abraham Lincoln, who is a Free Soilers election, and they didn't even show up in the polls on the South, and so the South secedes after his election. And so this marks the beginning of the Civil War, and the first armed conflict, it's not really a battle, is the attack on Fort Sumter, which basically Lincoln tried to get the South to provoke the North so that he didn't have to declare war against them. Before they did anything bad, so it didn't seem like he was being a tyrannical government. Instead, it seemed like he was only just trying to try to tame a disobedient child, really. So he was a brilliant strategist, though he did micromanage his generals, and he did go through like 8 different generals. Yeah, and so you have to realize that he had to fight both the Peace Democrats, the Copperheads in the North, in Maryland, as well as the Confederacy. And Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson really were these huge powerhouses. And Stonewall Jackson died, luckily, which really allowed us to win that battle of Gettysburg. And Abraham Lincoln got really upset when his general did not follow Robert E. Lee after the Battle of Gettysburg, which could have ended the war, and it didn't. And so you have to know the Anaconda Plan, which was the original plan, and it comes back after the Battle of Vicksburg, which basically conquers the Mississippi River, and it's the first Ulysses S. Grant victory. And so the Anaconda Plan is basically like squeeze the life out of them. Do Navy blockade, take over the Mississippi, and then just conquer the South. Emancipation Proclamation was basically just an attempt to stop Europe from coming into the war, and it changed the tide of the war. It changed it from trying to unite the country to being an issue of slavery, and Britain had already. And so the South was depending on Britain to help them in the war because of the cotton diplomacy that they had, and the Emancipation Proclamation ended cotton diplomacy, which was a good thing for the North and the Union. So it allowed them to win without European. And since slavery had ended in Britain a while ago, Britain did not want to participate in a war and support the cause of slavery. And then the Gettysburg Address also boosted morale. It also changed the course of the war. So know that the Emancipation Proclamation and the Gettysburg Address changed the tide of the war. And so know the major turning points: Vicksburg, Gettysburg, Sherman's March to the Sea. and Antietam. All four of those are major victories for the North. Vicksburg being the return of the Anaconda Plan, Grant's first victory, Gettysburg being a major success. It's the first victory in the entire Union Army. It's really it's the first turning point of the entire Civil War, because it's basically the first Union victory. Also know the Battle of Manassas, or the Battle of Bull Run, which are the same thing, but you need to know that they are basically it's the first battle. It's the first battle, right? It's the first battle, not the first armed conflict. That would be the attack on Fort Sumter, which is not a battle. It's just the first armed conflict. And the first battle would be Manassas or Bull Run. Those are the same thing. If you have a question that says Battle of Bull Run and also Battle of Manassas, that's not the correct answer. Neither of those are the correct answer, because those are the same thing. Unless it says both of the above or something like that, then it's right. But other than that, no, it's not. It won't be the right answer. So, at the end of the Civil War ends, and we have Abraham Lincoln's assassination in 1865. We have the surrender at the Appomattox Courthouse from Robert E. Lee to Ulysses S. Grant. And so after the assassination, Andrew Johnson becomes president, King Andrew II, after King Andrew I, Andrew Jackson, and then we have Andrew Johnson, so King Andrew I and King Andrew II. And so Andrew Johnson was a racist. He was from Tennessee, and he liked to veto laws, just like Andrew Jackson. And so this leads to the radical Reconstruction movement. So this leads to a radical Republican movement in Congress, as well as his attempted impeachment later on. And so this leads to the creation of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, the 13th freeing the slaves, the 14th giving them rights, and the 15th giving them universal male suffrage. Which upsets women, because it says universal male suffrage, not universal suffrage for all. It just says male suffrage. And so those amendments, but there's also resistance to these amendments, like the Ku Klux Klan, but that's it's attempted to be stopped by the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1873 or 1874, I believe. And so Reconstruction ends with the Second Corrupt Bargain, or the election of 1876, or the Compromise of 1877, which is basically when Rutherford B. Hayes's election to government, and it's the second corrupt bargain, because he becomes president only because they formed this presidential election committee in the House, because they couldn't choose who the president would be. Between the Republican and the Democrats. The Democrats have come back. Of course, the Democrats have come back. They've retaken the southern governments, even though they issued military rule under radical Reconstruction. And then what happened was he became president, because there were 8 Republicans and 7 Democrats on that committee. So you should also know the 10% plan, or the 10% plus plan, formed by Johnson and Lincoln, which basically just allowed them to pardon people, and basically said when 10% of the voting population applies for this pardon, or pledges loyalty to the Union, then that state becomes a state again. It's overturned by the Radical Reconstruction Acts of Congress and whatnot. And so also know the Civil Rights Act of 1866 is the first piece of legislation that major legal legislation that is overturned by a veto. It overturns a veto. It's passed despite Andrew Johnson vetoing it, and there are a lot of overturning vetoes in this Reconstruction era. And so that is the end of period 5, and after that is the Gilded Age, as well as the World Wars.